I'm starting to see why people move to LA after they spend their whole lives making videos, because I feel like I haven't seen the sun in weeks, so. Good morning, everybody. Today we're going over my February reading month in review. So welcome to the channel. If you have been here, great to see you again. If you haven't been here for one of my full videos, I'm so happy you're here. Last month I went over all of my yearly goals. We're not going to really touch on those again because I really haven't completed any of those goals. If you're interested in one of those, I'll link it somewhere. Maybe here? I don't know. It might be on the other side. I don't know. So we're not going to go over any of those goals because I really haven't completed it, but we are going to talk about February. We got the handy dandy reading journal. I am doing, I think, a little bit of revamping of my reading journal because I fell behind and I have like several pages that are almost completely blank. So I'm doing a little bit of revamping for March. I have already started my March reading journal, so you will get to see that next month. In the month of February, I read 21 books. It was a month I thought I was going to struggle with, and then I ended up reading a whole lot. In my last video, I went over some stats before we started discussing individual books, so that is what we are going to do right now. For the buying stats, I bought a lot less. Well, I received a lot less books than I did in January. January is my birth month, so I got a lot of gifts. But I did utilize my library a lot this month. So, just giving the very basic breakdowns, I got 3 books that were gifted to me by my friend Emily, which I really appreciate. I had 1 book lent to me by my partner's brother, so that has been given back since then. I bought 7 books. Yes, 7 books at Books A Million, which I did a library and bookstore haul a few weeks ago, so you can see what I bought in that video. And then I had 2 Audible books, 9 Kindle Unlimited books, and 9 books I got from the library. So a lot of borrowing this month, which was really good. That's kind of one of my goals. I'm trying to spend less money on my books this year. So yeah, pretty happy with that. Also, something significant that happened in the month of February, at the very, very end, I got access to Libby. So I'm hoping to not use very much Audible or Kindle Unlimited going forward. So I'm gonna see if I can eventually try and roll it off because I'm generally against giving Amazon money, but we will see. So in terms of my money spent, I spent $87.54 at Books A Million in that 1 book haul. And then my 2 subscriptions are Audible, which is $15 a month, and Kindle Unlimited, which is $12.83. So my total spending this month was $115.36. There's about a $60 difference. I spent $170 in January and I spent $115 in February. So that is really good. I love making progress. Pretty successful in that sense. Hopefully I'm gonna read the books that were gifted to me this upcoming month. So you will get to see those hopefully in March's recap. Let's talk about the books I read. I was very happy with this month. I read 21 books, which was more than I read in January. January I read 19 and I read 21. So I ended this month with book 40 of the year, which is a good place where I want to be. As I've said in previous recaps, I am not someone who's necessarily like, I have to read this many books in the year. I did that last year and I just found myself so exhausted. So I have time goals. I'm trying to read 50 hours a month, which if you saw my last video, I talk a lot about that. So 50 hours a month is an achievable goal for me with how much I read, about 2 hours a day. I read 21 books, 5,575 pages, over 53 hours. So that's roughly 132.7 pages an hour. My best day read this month was I read 483 pages and 282 minutes. I believe that was a day where I also did a lot of audiobook reading, which I've mentioned before. Doesn't really go into my page count because it doesn't really say how many pages. But yeah, so It looks like I read multiple books and a little bit of an audiobook that day. My star rating for the month of February is 3.69 star average. I use the Copile method when I am rating books in my reading journal, which I explained in a previous video. I'm not really going to explain it here. You're also welcome to Google it. I'll put the spelling on the screen somewhere. And I use that to find the star averages. And then once I have my star averages, I kind of combine those. So 3.69 stars. Overall, a pretty good month. Pretty average, but leaning up towards a good month. If you saw my last recap video, you know I'm a graph person. Is this going to focus? There we go. You know I'm a graph person. I like keeping track of things. I had 5 graphs last month because I also a lot of times have a reread versus new read graph. I had no rereads this month, which is not a regular thing for me. I do think I'm going to reread something this month just to give my brain a little bit of a break. But yeah, no rereads in February. My format. 10 of the books I read this month were digital, 2 were audio, and 9 were print. My book types, 18 of them were fiction novels. I know I need to read more nonfiction. I'll get there. But 18 of them were fiction novels. 1 was a memoir, 1 was poetry, and 1 was a book of essays, which I will talk about because it was one of my favorite books of the month. My genre. So, this is where the pie chart gets a little colorful. It's that orange one right there. So these are the main genres that my books covered. And these were, there was 1 memoir, 3 classics, 7 romances, 1 book on feminism, 3 historical fictions, 1 poetry, 2 thrillers, and 3 literary fictions. I read a lot. I'm not super constrained to one type of book. I'm not gonna sit here and read only fantasy for an entire month. If you want to see me do like an only fantasy for the whole week reading blog, let me know. I'd be happy to do that. But I'm not someone who's like, this month I'm only reading classics, because that's not really my jam. And then my ratings. So, as I mentioned, my books this month were 3.69 stars on average, but my ratings overall, I gave 2 books 2 stars, I gave 4 books 3 stars, 3 books 3.5 stars, 9 books 4 stars, so like I said, a really good reading month for me. And then I gave 3 5 stars this month. Let's break down some of the stuff I read. I am mostly going to talk about my goal books, what was my longest read in the month, my shortest read, and my 3 favorite reads. Let's go ahead and do that. If you want a full list I think last month I went ahead and like reviewed all of the books I read. I don't know if I want to do that. I think I'm going to just do a highlights this time. If you guys hate it, please let me know. I think I'm only going to go over the ones that I was really impressed by, or like the highlights. So, the very first book I read this month was a 5-star read. So, in the month of February, I tried my best to read only Black authors. That failed pretty quickly because I still had a leftover book from January that I got from the library that I wanted to finish, and then I read one other that was not written by a Black author. So, the very first book I read this month, 5 stars, was Evil Eye by Itaf Room. One of the things that I wanted to try to do was read more literature by Palestinian authors. So this one was one that came highly recommended. I've seen it in a lot of booktube reviews and everyone said they really like it, and I am inclined to agree. This was a book that I finished and almost immediately went and bought at a store. So this is my copy. I'm very happy with this book. I thought it was so interesting learning about Palestinian culture. And even though it's a literary fiction, I think a lot of it takes place, like, is based on Itaf Room's real life, which was really interesting. And she had such descriptive language. She had such interesting characters. Her main character was very compelling. I want to see if I wrote down her main character's name. I did not. But this book on the Copile scale, got a 9.29 average, which is 5 stars. The next book I read was The Color Purple by Alice Walker. I read that for the first time ever. I was originally looking for a black classic, which I found out that The Color Purple I don't think is considered a classic because it was written in the 80s, but really, really good. I also took the time, and I know this isn't necessarily a book, but I took the time to watch The Color Purple musical that just came out this past year. Also really stinking good. If you haven't seen it, if you haven't read the book, read the book. If you haven't seen the movie, you should also see the movie. So the classic that I ended up reading this month were Their Eyes Were Watching God, which I thought was really, really interesting, and I think it was very ahead of its time for what the publishing company was, because this book was written in the 30s, I want to say, and it's about an independent and wealthy black woman. I really, really liked it. I actually haven't found a copy to put on my bookshelf yet. I am seeking it out currently. But yeah, so that was my classic this month. Janie is such an interesting character, and just her entire life story is so good. I'm probably going to read it next year and actually like go through and annotate it, because I am not someone who believes in annotating on the first read of a book. That one was really, really, really good. So if you haven't read it, please take the time to do it. If you didn't study it in school, like I also didn't study it in school, take the time to read it now. It's a pretty easy read. Right after that, I read my first nonfiction of the month and my second 5-star book of the month, Ain't I a Woman by Bell Hooks. And it's about black women's kind of place in society and how they are treated by white people, specifically white women, and how a lot of the times it feels like blackness and feminism don't work together. And it's written a lot from Bell Hooks' own experience. There's a reason why Bell Hooks is such like a big name in feminism. And I thought that book was so interesting. Like, it's one of those books that's like literally melt your mind. It's stuff like, obviously I have to, if I'm reading black feminism, pieces on black feminism, I have to acknowledge a lot of parts of myself that maybe I'm not so willing to examine. And that's the thing about privilege, is you gotta pay attention to that kind of stuff. But I read that book and I was just like, my mind is entirely blown. I have to get this book. So I'm currently on the hunt for it. I think next month or this month when I buy my books, I will definitely order that one, because it was really, really interesting. Really good. I am gonna keep my eye out and try and read more Bell Hooks. But it also was really interesting because it put a whole lens on a lot of the rest of the literature I read. So if you haven't read any Bell Hooks before, if you're like me and you're an ignorant fool, go and pick up some Bell Hooks. You're especially if you come from a background like me and you're white. Right after I finished Ain't I a Woman, I read my very first Toni Morrison, The Bluest Eye. I want to read more of her literature, because The Bluest Eye was terribly, terribly depressing. And I know what she was trying to analyze and what she was trying to discuss and like talk about the comfortability of being black and stuff like that. Which, reading that right after Ain't I a Woman also just put such a lens on it, but it was terribly depressing. So if you guys really liked like Beloved or one of her other works, let me know, and I'm gonna try and seek it out anyway, but like, let me know your thoughts on Toni Morrison, because she is an excellent writer. I think the story just wasn't necessarily for me, but I loved her voice and her writing. So we're skipping a few books because I read quite a bit of romance and not a lot of it stood out. The next book that I gave 5 stars that I was really, really impressed by, it was also a nonfiction, was The Sun Does Shine by Anthony Ray Hinton. My partner's brother lent this to me because he's still in high school and he had to read it for an assignment, so thank you, Joseph. This story is about a man who was falsely imprisoned for a murder that he didn't commit and was imprisoned for 40 years. He went in the late 70s and then got out in, I want to say 2014, I want to say. He has a really good voice, and I'm sure his co-author really helped with that. but his story was so interesting and so compelling. Last month I read Freedom is a Constant Struggle, which has a lot of discussion about the US prison system, so I've been trying to educate myself on that a little bit more. And The Sun Does Shine was a really, really great resource because obviously it's a first-hand account of living on death row for 40 years and just having to hope that he would get absolved of this crime. I definitely cried like a baby several times. I read it in one sitting, and there were definitely several times where I just had to like put the book down and just cry a little. But it was so good and so worth it. So if you haven't read that before, please take the time to do so. My translated work this month was La Divine by Marie Ndiaye. I read it as an Audible book. I wasn't a fan of it, necessarily. I wish I had chosen another translated work. I don't know if it was the narrator or what it was, but I didn't really get into it. But I am mentioning it because it was it was honestly my least favorite read of the month. I gave it a 4 average on the Cawpile scale, which is only 2 stars. I just don't think it was for me. And that is fine. Sometimes you're gonna find books. But I did finish it, so I didn't want to like 1-star it because I had to stop. I did end up reading the whole thing. But yeah, that was my translated work of the month. Another Black classic I read this month was The Man Who Lived Underground by Richard Wright. He wrote Savage Son, I believe, and that was the one I had my eye out for, but I couldn't end up finding it, so I read his shorter story. And I believe that was my shortest read of the month. It was not my shortest read of the month, but it was my shortest novel of the month. That one was also very, very good. It also had a discussion. A lot of Richard Wright's writing discusses police brutality and the relationship between police and Black communities. So that one was very good. A very shocking ending. My shortest read of the month was Girls That Never Die, which was a poetry collection. I am not a poetry person. I can't explain it. I don't know why, but I really, really liked this poetry collection. I think I'm actually gonna look. Wait, I still have it. Girls That Never Die. I have not returned it to the library yet. A really, really interesting collection. I read it in one sitting. I would like to buy some of her work because it's very good. Sophia Elhio, I think. Because I read a ton of romance this month, I'm gonna give you 2 or 3 of my highlights. The first one was the Brown Sister trilogy by Talia Hibbert. She has such fun ways. I don't know, I really like her voice and she's got a really good sense of humor, but I read Get a Life, Chloe Brown, and Take a Hint, Danny Brown, so I still have to read the third one, but I had a really good time reading those. I read both of them pretty quickly. I know I read Danny Brown in one sitting. So if you are a romance fan and you want something fairly easy to read, that is a really great trilogy. My absolute favorite romance read of the month was Honey and Spice by Bolu Babalola, and it was about just kind of the Black student collective of a college campus and about girl Kiki who runs a radio show. I am not going to explain it any further. I really think you guys should read it, and it was genuinely one of the most interesting couples I encountered in the month of February in my romance reading. That one was probably that one was definitely my favorite romance read, and it might have been one of my top fiction reads of the month, just because I had so much fun reading it. At the beginning of my reading journal, I have a book battle. I don't know if you can see it. It's right here, where I'm gonna put the best read of each month. And I am really struggling to decide what I had so many good reads this month. I'm really struggling to decide what my favorite read of the month was. I had 5 stars. When I read nonfictions, I don't do the Cawpile method. It's really only built for fiction books. So the highest rated one I have is Evil Eye by Itaf Room with the 9.29 on the Cawpile scale. But I also gave 5 stars to Ain't I a Woman and The Sun Does Shine. So for a long time I was having a really difficult time picking what my favorite was. I do think it's gonna have to be Ain't I a Woman by Bell Hooks, because that book straight up altered my brain chemistry and it affected the rest of my reading experience for the entire month of February and going on. Spoiler alert, I read my very first Octavia E. Spencer, and going into that and reading it with the bell hooks basics, it's just gonna have to be my favorite book of the month because it literally altered my brain chemistry. It's going to be facing up against Crying in H Mart, which I'm gonna have to marinate on that one. I loved Crying in H Mart. I'll let you guys know at some point which one wins. I'm sure at the end of the year we'll go over the entire book battle and I'll talk about like my 12 best reads of the year. That is really all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like, give it a comment. If you really agreed with me or you really disagreed with me, please let me know. Comment below. If you like what I'm doing on this channel, feel free to hit subscribe, hit the little bell to give you notifications when I upload. I upload full-length videos every Sunday, and I also upload shorts 4 or 5 times a week. Also, welcome to everyone who's new. I'm so glad to see you. Last time I posted, I had just hit 100 subscribers, and as I'm recording this, I am up to 170, I think. Almost 180. So, hi! Welcome! I'm so flattered that you've subscribed. So please tell me what your favorite read of February was. Take care of yourself. Stay warm if you're in the middle of winter like we are. It's warming up, but stay warm if you're colder than I am right now.